They told me I was lucky. That is what I remember most clearly from those first days, before I understood what luck meant in the Guard. The recruiting sergeant on my homeworld had looked at my scores, at my steady hands and decent eyesight, and he had smiled in a way that I mistook for warmth. "You have been selected for specialized weapons training," he said. "You will serve the Emperor in ways that common riflemen cannot." I believed him. I believed that I had been chosen for something better than the endless grinding infantry advances that consumed so many of us in anonymous waves. I was 17 years old, and I knew nothing of heat that does not fade, of radiation that settles into bone like a patient guest that never leaves. The transport that carried us to the training facility was cold, and I remember pressing my hands against the metal walls and shivering. Within a year, I would have given anything for that cold. I would have pressed my ruined skin against frozen steel and wept with gratitude for the relief. But I did not know that then. None of us did. We were 40 recruits selected from a dozen worlds, and we spoke in excited whispers about the honor of becoming tank hunters, about the specialized equipment we would receive, about the prestige that came with being trusted with rare and powerful weapons. The instructors let us believe these things. They never lied to us directly. They simply allowed us to construct our own comfortable illusions and then watched as reality slowly burned them away. The training facility was on a dead moon that orbited a forge world, close enough to receive shipments of equipment, but far enough that whatever happened to us would not trouble the production quotas of the manufacturums below. I noticed, during those first weeks, that the veteran instructors wore peculiar gear. Their uniforms were lined with a silvery material that caught the light strangely, and they kept their faces hidden behind masks with darkened lenses. When they demonstrated the weapons we would use, they stood at angles, positioning their bodies in ways that seemed almost ritualistic. I asked one of my fellow recruits about this, a woman named Sarah, who had been a machinist's daughter on an industrial world. She shrugged and said they were probably protecting themselves from backblast. It made sense at the time. Everything made sense at the time, because we needed it to. The first time I fired a thermal weapon, I felt something I had never experienced before. The instructors called them various names, these directed energy devices that could reduce armored vehicles to slag. The common soldiers called them melters, though that term encompassed many variants of the same terrible technology. What they all shared was this: they did not simply project heat, they created it, in quantities and concentrations that the human body was never meant to endure. Even standing behind the weapon, even with the thermal baffles and the heat shields and the protective layering, some of that energy reached you. It had to. Physics demanded it. The Emperor protects, but thermodynamics is indifferent to prayer. I remember the target, a decommissioned armored vehicle set at the far end of the firing range. I remember settling the weapon's weight against my shoulder, feeling the power cell hum against my back like a living thing. I remember the instructor's voice, calm and slightly muffled behind his mask, walking me through the activation sequence. And I remember the moment I pulled the trigger and the world became white and hot and absolute. The beam lasted perhaps 2 seconds. The tank's frontal armor glowed orange, then white, then simply ceased to exist, collapsing inward as the metal turned to vapor and the structure lost all integrity. I had destroyed something that would have shrugged off a dozen conventional rounds. I had killed a machine that could have slaughtered 100 infantrymen. I felt like a giant. What I did not feel, not at first, was the warmth that had settled into my chest. The deep, internal sensation of heat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the air around me. It was faint that first time, barely noticeable beneath the adrenaline and the pride, but it was there. It had already begun. We trained for 3 months, and during that time, I began to notice things that troubled me. Small things, at first. The veteran instructors never joined us for meals. They ate separately, in a sealed section of the facility, and when I asked why, I was told it was a matter of rank and protocol. But I saw one of them once, passing through a corridor with his mask removed to drink from a flask, and his face was wrong in ways I could not immediately identify. His skin had a grayish undertone, and there were patches near his jaw where it seemed too smooth, too tight, as if it had been rebuilt rather than grown. He saw me looking, and he smiled, and his teeth were metal. "Why are his teeth metal?" I asked Sarah that night in the barracks. She looked at me as if I had asked why water was wet. "Because they fell out," she said. And then she returned to cleaning her weapon and would not say anything more. I lay awake that night, feeling the warmth in my chest, and I told myself that she was wrong. I told myself that whatever had happened to the veterans was a result of poor equipment, of accidents, of problems that had since been corrected. I told myself many things in those early days, because the alternative was to admit that I had been selected not for honor but for expendability. We were assigned to frontline units after our training, scattered across the war zone in teams of 3. My crew consisted of myself as the primary gunner, a spotter named Corin who had grown up in the underhives and spoke rarely, and our crew leader, a veteran sergeant named Voss who had served for 6 years. 6 years. I did not understand, at the time, what that meant. The average lifespan of a Melta crew in active combat was 18 months. Voss had survived 4 times that long, and I thought this made him lucky, skilled, blessed by the Emperor's protection. I did not yet understand that survival and luck were not the same thing, and that sometimes the cruelest fate was to keep living. Voss never removed his mask, not to eat, not to sleep, not even in the relative safety of our dugout positions between engagements. He had modified his uniform extensively, layering additional shielding around his torso and his hands, and he moved with a careful precision that I initially mistook for discipline. It was only later that I realized he moved that way because quick movements caused him pain. Everything caused him pain. He simply did not acknowledge it, because to acknowledge it would have been to admit that he was already dying, 1 cell at a time, and had been for years. Our first engagement came 3 weeks after we reached the front. An enemy armored column was advancing on our position, and conventional anti-tank weapons had proven insufficient against their heavy vehicles. We were called forward, the specialized teams, the tank hunters, the ones who carried the weapons that could turn metal to mist. I remember the fear, hot and electric in my blood, as we took our position behind a shattered wall. I remember Corin's hand on my shoulder, steadying me. I remember Voss's voice, calm as still water, counting down the distance. And I remember the moment the lead vehicle came into range, and I pulled the trigger and felt the world dissolve into light. 3 seconds. That was how long the beam lasted. 3 seconds of absolute energy, of molecular level destruction, of heat so intense that the air itself seemed to scream. The enemy vehicle simply ceased to exist as a coherent structure, its armor flowing like water, its ammunition cooking off in a chain of secondary explosions that tore through the infantry following behind it. I had killed perhaps a dozen enemies in those 3 seconds. I had stopped an advance that would have overrun our position. I had saved lives, and I had taken something from myself that I could never get back. The warmth in my chest intensified, spreading outward through my ribs, settling into my spine. It was not painful. Not yet. It was simply present. A passenger that had taken up residence in my body without asking permission. After the battle, when we returned to our dugout to rest, I noticed that my hands were trembling, not from fear, from something else, something that felt almost like vibration, as if my cells themselves had been agitated and could not quite settle back into stillness. Voss noticed. He always noticed. He sat across from me in the dim light of our shelter, his mask reflecting the glow of the chemical lantern, and he said nothing for a long time. Then he reached into his kit and produced a small vial of pills. "Take 2 of these," he said. His voice was rough, damaged, as if his throat had been scarred from the inside. "They help with the shaking. They help with a lot of things." In the beginning, I asked him what they were, and he laughed, a sound like metal scraping against metal. He said they were a gift from the Medicae, and that I should not ask questions about gifts. I took the pills. They did help with the shaking. They helped with the warmth too, dulling it to a background hum that I could almost ignore. Over the following weeks, I learned to rely on them, learned to time my doses around our engagements so that I could function effectively in combat. I learned many things in those weeks. I learned that the warmth never truly went away, that it simply accumulated, layer upon layer, like sediment building at the bottom of a lake. I learned that the pills were not a cure, but a postponement, that they allowed me to continue functioning while my body slowly broke down around my still living consciousness. I learned that this was the bargain, the price of being a tank killer, and that no one had ever intended to tell me the truth until it was too late to matter. 4 months into my deployment, my hair began to fall out. It happened gradually at first, a few extra strands on my pillow each morning, a slight thinning at my temples that I attributed to stress. Then it accelerated. I would run my fingers through my hair, and they would come away trailing dark streamers, clumps and clusters that seemed far too substantial to be natural shedding. Within 6 weeks I was bald, my scalp smooth and sensitive, prone to blistering if I spent too long in direct sunlight. Corin said nothing about it. He had begun losing his own hair by then, and speaking of it would have meant acknowledging what we both already knew. The Medicae on our base took an unusual interest in us. They called us in for regular examinations, far more frequent than the standard physical assessments given to common infantry. They took samples of our blood, our saliva, our skin. They measured our vital signs with equipment I did not recognize, devices that hummed and clicked and produced readings on screens we were not permitted to see. When I asked what they were looking for, they smiled and said they were monitoring our health, ensuring that we remained combat effective. They said this in the same tone that a farmer might use when discussing the condition of his livestock. I understood, eventually, that this was precisely how they saw us. I found the records by accident. I was not searching for them, had not even suspected their existence. I was looking for my duty roster, trying to determine when our next engagement would be scheduled, and I accessed the wrong file on the cogitator terminal. It was a medical database, and my name was in it, alongside Corin's, alongside the names of every Melta crew currently serving in our sector. The file was labeled Thermal Weapons Exposure Study, Phase 3. It contained detailed notes on our physical deterioration, complete with projections for how much longer each of us would remain functional. According to the file, I had approximately 14 months before my organs began to fail. Corin had 8. Voss had been in the terminal phase for over a year, sustained only by a cocktail of medications and mechanical supplements that the Medicae had been testing on his slowly failing body. We were not soldiers. We were test subjects. Our entire unit had been constructed as a research program, a long-term study of how much radiation the human body could absorb before it ceased to function. Every engagement, every kill, every tank we destroyed added to the data set. Our deaths would provide valuable information about radiation tolerance thresholds. Our suffering would help the Mechanicus refine the weapons we carried, perhaps someday producing variants that killed their operators more slowly. This was our purpose. This was why we had been selected, why we had been told we were lucky. We were experimental animals who had been given the privilege of dying for the advancement of military technology. I expected to feel rage when I understood this. I expected the revelation to break something inside me, to send me spiraling into fury or despair. Instead, I felt only a tired resignation, a sense that I had always known this truth on some level and had simply been waiting for confirmation. The Imperium had never pretended to value individual lives. It had never claimed that we were anything more than resources to be spent in the Emperor's service. I had simply been too young, too naive, to understand what that really meant. Now I understood, and understanding changed nothing, because there was nowhere to go, nothing to do, no escape from the fate that had already been set in motion inside my irradiated cells. I continued to fight. What else was there to do? The enemy did not care about my medical status, did not pause their advances out of sympathy for my deteriorating condition. There were tanks to kill, positions to hold, battles to win. I took my pills and I fired my weapon, and I felt the warmth intensify with each engagement, spreading through my body like an internal sunset that would never fully set. My fingernails began to loosen in their beds. My gums bled when I ate solid food. I developed sores on my skin that healed slowly and left silver-white scars that caught the light like metal. When I looked in a mirror, I saw Voss looking back at me, and I understood now why he never removed his mask. It was not discipline, it was mercy, for himself and for those who would have had to look at what remained of his face. Corin died during our 9th month of deployment. It happened between engagements, in the quiet hours when we were supposed to be resting. I woke to find him still and cold beside me, his eyes open and fixed on the ceiling of our dugout. The Medicae said his heart had simply stopped, worn out by months of radiation exposure that had damaged the muscle at a cellular level. They took his body for study. They took blood samples and tissue samples and readings from equipment I did not recognize. Then they assigned us a replacement, a young man named Davin who had just completed his training and who looked at Voss and me with the same mixture of awe and unease that I had once felt toward our instructors. I watched him carry his weapon for the first time, watched him marvel at the power it gave him, and I felt nothing but a profound and helpless pity. The war ground on, as wars in the Imperium always do. We killed tanks, we held positions, we pushed back armored advances and supported infantry operations, and did all the things that specialized weapons crews were meant to do. And with each engagement, each trigger pull, each beam of absolute destruction, we paid the price in ways that would not become fully apparent until much later. Davin's hair began to fall out within 2 months. He tried to hide it at first, wearing his helmet even in the safety of our dugout, but eventually he stopped pretending. We all stopped pretending. Eventually, Voss collapsed during a firefight in our 14th month. One moment he was beside me, calling out targeting data, and the next he was on the ground, his body seizing, his mask fallen away to reveal a face that was more scar tissue than skin. I saw his eyes, filmed with a milky whiteness, rolling back into his skull. I saw his hands clawing at the dirt, leaving trails in the mud. I saw the foam at his mouth, pink with blood, and I kept firing because the enemy was still advancing, and there was nothing else I could do. By the time the battle ended, Voss was dead. The Medicae took his body and said they were grateful for his service, and entered notes into their files about the duration of his survival and the specific nature of his final seizures. I received a commendation for maintaining combat effectiveness during the loss of my commanding officer. They promoted me to crew leader. I did not want the promotion. I did not want the responsibility of leading others into the same slow death that was already claiming me. But the Guard does not ask what its soldiers want. It tells them what they are, and it expects them to become that thing, regardless of their own feelings on the matter. So, I became crew leader. I became the veteran with the damaged voice and the layered shielding and the movements that were too careful, too controlled. I became the one who handed out pills to new recruits and watched them marvel at the power of the weapons they carried and said nothing about what that power would cost them. Davin died 6 months after Voss. His decline was faster than mine had been. His body, less resilient to the accumulated exposure. Perhaps it was genetics, or perhaps it was simply luck. The randomness of cellular damage distributing itself unevenly across different physiologies. The Medicae were very interested in the speed of his deterioration. They took extensive notes. They adjusted their projections. They thanked me for providing such useful data points and assigned me a new team member, a woman named Sella, who reminded me of Sarah from training. I wondered, sometimes, what had happened to Sarah. I hoped she had died quickly, in battle, rather than slowly, in a Medicae facility, her body catalogued and measured and studied until the last moment of consciousness. I am writing this in what the Medicae tell me are my final weeks. My hands shake so badly that I can barely hold the stylus, and the words swim and blur on the screen before me because my eyes have begun to fail. The warmth is everywhere now, no longer confined to my chest but spread throughout my entire body, a constant low-grade fever that no medication can fully suppress. My teeth have been replaced with metal. My bones ache with a deep, persistent pain that flares with every movement. I have sores on my skin that no longer heal at all, just remain, open and weeping, covered with bandages that the Medicae change twice daily as part of their ongoing observation protocol. I could stop. I could refuse to fight, refuse to fire, refuse to participate any further in the study that has consumed my body and will soon consume my life. But what would be the point? The damage is already done. My cells are already dying, one by one, their structures scrambled by months of exposure to energies that the human form was never meant to channel. Whether I fire the weapon again or not, I will die within weeks, my organs failing in a cascade that the Medicae have predicted with remarkable precision. At least if I fight, if I continue to kill tanks and save infantry and do the work I was trained to do, my death will mean something. At least the data will be complete. Sailor leads the crew now. I am too weak for fieldwork, too slow, too prone to collapse at critical moments. I sit in the command bunker and I watch the battle feeds, and I call out targeting data when I can see clearly enough to read the screens. When I cannot, I simply sit and feel the warmth pulsing through me, and think about all the tanks I have killed, all the enemies I have vaporized, all the infantry I have saved through the exercise of terrible, beautiful, destroying power. It was worth it, I tell myself. The trade was fair. I gave my body and my health and my future, and in return I was allowed to matter, to make a difference, to be something more than one anonymous soldier in an endless tide of anonymous soldiers. I was a tank killer. I was death to armored vehicles and terror to enemy commanders. I was useful in a way that most people never get to be. The Medicae came to me yesterday with a new proposal. They have been developing a treatment, they said, an experimental therapy that might extend my functional lifespan by several months. It would involve extensive modification, the replacement of failing organs with mechanical alternatives, the integration of systems that would filter the radiation from my blood and allow me to continue operating. I would become something like what Voss had been in his final years, more machine than flesh, sustained by technology rather than biology. I would be able to return to the field. I would be able to fire the weapon again. I asked them what the catch was, and they smiled, and they told me that there was no catch, that they simply wanted to help me continue serving the Emperor. But I saw the way they looked at each other, the barely concealed excitement in their eyes, and I understood. I understood that I was not being offered treatment. I was being offered the chance to become a new phase of the experiment, a test subject for invasive modifications that they could not ethically perform on anyone who had not already been written off as terminal. My extended survival would provide valuable data on human-machine integration under combat conditions. My continued suffering would advance their research in ways that my death alone could not. I said yes. What else was I going to say? I have no family to return to, no homeworld that would welcome back the ruined thing I have become, no future beyond the one they are offering me. At least as a test subject I will continue to matter. At least my pain will serve a purpose, will contribute to something larger than myself, will help the Mechanicus refine their weapons and their treatments and their understanding of what the human body can endure. I have been a tool of the Imperium since the day I was conscripted, and I will be a tool until the day they finally discard me. This is not tragedy. This is simply truth, the cold and indifferent truth that underlies all of our service. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. The Medicae have shown me diagrams of what they intend to do, the organs they will remove and replace, the systems they will install, the modifications that will allow my failing body to continue functioning despite the cellular damage that pervades every tissue. I will not be fully human when they are done with me. I will be something else, something new, something that the Mechanicus does not yet have a proper classification for. Perhaps they will give me a designation, a serial number, a new identity to match my new form. Perhaps I will forget, eventually, that I was ever anything other than what they make me. But I do not think I will forget the warmth. I do not think I will ever forget the sensation of that first trigger pull, the beam of absolute destruction, the tank collapsing in on itself like a crushed insect, that moment when I felt like a giant, when I believed I had been selected for something special, when I was too young and too stupid to understand that special and expendable are often the same thing. I will carry that memory with me into whatever I become, a small hot coal of recollection burning at the core of my mechanical heart. They told me I was lucky. I understand now what they meant. Lucky enough to survive long enough to become something else. Lucky enough to matter, in my small way, to the vast grinding machinery of imperial progress. Lucky enough to burn for the Emperor, and to keep burning, and to never quite burn out. The melter sings when it fires, a high, pure note that cuts through the chaos of battle like a blade through flesh. I used to think it was beautiful. I still think it is beautiful. And tomorrow, when they open me up and begin replacing my failing parts with blessed machine, I will think about that song, and I will be grateful for every note, every shot, every tank that died screaming under the light of my devotion. This is my confession. This is my testament. This is the price I have paid and will continue paying until there is nothing left of me but metal and memory and warmth. The Emperor protects. The machine provides. The rest is simply radiation, patient and eternal, doing its slow and holy work. They began the modifications at dawn. I know this only because the Medicae told me afterward, as I lay in the recovery bay with tubes threading into my arms and machines clicking and humming beside my bed. I had been unconscious for the procedure itself, sedated into a darkness so complete that it felt almost like death. Perhaps it was death, in a way. The person who went under that knife did not wake up. Something else did. Something that wore my memories like a borrowed coat and looked out through my eyes at a world that had become subtly, fundamentally different. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain. Not a reduction, not a dampening, but a complete removal, as if someone had reached into my nervous system and simply excised the capacity for certain kinds of suffering. The chronic ache in my bones was gone. The burning in my organs was gone. The endless low-grade fever that had been my constant companion for over a year was gone. In its place was a strange hollowness, an emptiness where sensation should have been, as if parts of my body had been replaced with negative space. The Medicae explained what they had done, speaking in technical terms that I only partially understood. They had removed my liver, my kidneys, my spleen. They had replaced them with mechanical filters that would process the radiation from my blood more efficiently than organic tissue ever could. They had reinforced my bones with metal threading, strengthened my muscles with synthetic fibers, installed a secondary heart that would take over if my primary organ failed. They had done all of this not to save me, they admitted, but to extend my functional lifespan long enough to gather useful data on how such modifications performed under combat conditions. I was, they told me proudly, the most extensively modified Melta Gunner in the sector, perhaps in the entire segmentum. I would be a testament to the possibilities of human-machine integration, a walking demonstration of what could be achieved when imperial science was applied without the constraints of conventional medical ethics. They expected me to be grateful. I nodded and said the appropriate words, and felt nothing at all except that strange hollowness, that absence where my humanity used to be. Recovery took 3 weeks. During that time, I learned to operate my new body, to understand its rhythms and limitations and capabilities. I was stronger than I had been, faster, more resilient. The synthetic components did not tire the way organic muscle did. The mechanical filters processed toxins and radiation with an efficiency that my original organs could never have matched. I could hold the melter steady for extended periods without trembling. I could fire it repeatedly without the accumulating fatigue that had once forced me to pause between engagements. I was, by any objective measure, a superior soldier to the one I had been before. But I was also something less. The modifications had changed not just my body but my perception, my experience of existence itself. Colors seemed flatter now, sounds less resonant, textures less distinct. The Medicae said this was normal, a side effect of the neural integration required to control the mechanical components. They said I would adjust, that my brain would learn to interpret the new sensory inputs, that eventually I would forget I had ever perceived the world any other way. They said this as if it was reassuring, as if the loss of human sensation was a small price to pay for enhanced combat effectiveness. Sailor visited me during my recovery. She sat beside my bed and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read, her eyes moving over the visible modifications, the metal threading that now showed through my skin at my wrists and temples, the subtle wrongness of my proportions where synthetic components had altered my silhouette. She asked me how I felt, and I told her the truth. I did not know. I did not know how to feel anything anymore. Not really. The capacity for emotional response seemed to have been dulled along with the capacity for physical sensation, as if the Medicae had accidentally excised something essential while they were removing my failing organs. She was quiet for a long time after I said this. Then she reached out and took my hand, my modified hand with its metal threading and synthetic tendons, and she held it tightly. "You are still you," she said. "Whatever they have done, whatever they have replaced, you are still the person I have fought beside for the past year. You are still my crew leader. You are still Caro." I did not tell her that I could not feel her grip. I did not tell her that the warmth of her skin was just data now, numbers processed by sensors rather than nerves, interpreted by algorithms rather than instinct. I let her believe what she needed to believe, and I nodded. And I said, yes, I am still Caro. But I was not certain, even then, that this was true. They sent me back to the front within a month. The Medicae wanted field data on how the modifications performed under actual combat conditions, and the tactical situation had deteriorated in my absence. Enemy armor was advancing on multiple fronts, and there were not enough melter crews to hold them all back. My unit had taken casualties. Sailor was struggling to maintain effectiveness with inexperienced crew members who did not yet understand the rhythms of combat. I was needed, they told me. My enhanced capabilities were needed. The Imperium was calling, and I had no choice but to answer. The first time I fired the melter after my modifications, I felt something I had not expected. Not warmth, exactly, but a kind of resonance, a harmony between the weapon and my mechanical components that had not existed before. The power cell hummed against my back, and I felt that hum translated through the synthetic fibers of my muscles, the metal threading of my bones, the algorithms that now governed so much of my physical function. For a moment, just a moment, I was not a person holding a weapon. I was a system, a unified mechanism of targeting and destruction, purpose made manifest in metal and flesh. The tank died. It always died, when the melter touched it. But this time I watched its destruction with a clarity I had never before possessed. My enhanced eyes tracking the exact progression of the molecular disruption, my modified brain processing the data and filing it away for later transmission to the Medicae. I was gathering intelligence even as I killed. I was serving multiple purposes simultaneously, weapon and soldier and test subject all at once. The warmth returned afterward, not the physical sensation, which my modifications had excised, but a memory of warmth, a phantom impression of what I had once felt after every engagement. My mechanical components did not experience radiation damage the way organic tissue did. The filters processed the exposure, cleaned my blood, prevented the cellular degradation that had once been slowly killing me. But my brain still remembered what it had felt like, and it generated a ghost of that sensation, a neural echo of the suffering I could no longer physically experience. I began to seek out that echo. It was the only thing that still felt like feeling, the only connection I maintained to the person I had been before the modifications. I volunteered for extra engagements, requested the most dangerous targeting assignments, pushed my mechanical body to its limits and beyond in search of that phantom warmth. The Medicae were delighted. They saw my aggression as evidence that the modifications had been successful. that I had adapted to my new capabilities and was eager to employ them. They did not understand that I was not seeking combat. I was seeking the only experience I had left that still felt human. Sailor tried to talk to me about it. She noticed the change in my behavior, the recklessness that had replaced my former caution, the way I threw myself into engagements with an abandon that bordered on suicidal. She asked me if I was trying to die, and I considered the question seriously before answering. No, I said. I was trying to feel, and the Melta was the only thing that still made me feel anything at all. She did not understand. How could she? She was still human, still organic, still capable of experiencing the world through nerves and hormones and the subtle chemical dance of biological consciousness. She did not know what it was like to have that taken away, to be reduced to data and algorithms and the hollow efficiency of mechanical function. She did not know that the warmth of her hand on mine was just numbers now, just information, just another input processed by systems that had no capacity for genuine response. I told her to stay away from me. I told her that I was not the person she had fought beside, not anymore, and that pretending otherwise would only cause her pain. She refused. She said that we were crew, that we had bled together and killed together and survived together, and that no amount of modification could change what that meant. She said she would stand beside me until one of us fell, and that she hoped it would be her rather than me, because at least then she would not have to watch me become something she could no longer recognize. I did not deserve her loyalty. I do not deserve it still. But I cannot deny that it matters to me. In whatever limited way, I am still capable of valuing such things. She is the last thread connecting me to what I was, the last evidence that I was once a person rather than a mechanism, and I cling to that thread with a desperation that my modified consciousness cannot fully explain. The battles continued. The war ground on. I killed tanks and saved infantry, and gathered data for the Medicae, and felt the phantom warmth grow fainter with each engagement, as if even my memories were beginning to degrade under the assault of mechanical efficiency. I began to notice that I was processing the world differently, making decisions based on tactical algorithms rather than instinct, evaluating situations in terms of probability matrices rather than intuition. The human part of me was retreating, shrinking, being crowded out by the systems that now governed so much of my function. I received a communication from the Medicae 3 months after my modifications. They were pleased with my performance, they said. The data I had provided was invaluable. Beyond their most optimistic projections, they wanted to proceed to the next phase of the experiment, to install additional modifications that would enhance my combat effectiveness even further. They spoke of improved targeting systems, of direct neural interfaces with my weapon, of modifications that would allow me to fire the Melta without physical triggers or controls. They spoke of making me more efficient, more lethal, more useful. They did not speak of making me more human. That was not part of their project. That had never been part of their project. I asked them what would remain of me. After these additional modifications, they looked at each other with expressions I could not read, and they said that I would retain my core consciousness, my memories, my sense of self. They said that I would still be me, just enhanced, just improved, just more capable of serving the Emperor's will. They said this in the same tone they had used when they told me I was lucky, and I understood that they were lying, or at least that they were telling a truth so partial as to be meaningless. I said yes anyway. What else was I going to say? The second round of modifications took 2 weeks. They opened my skull and installed interfaces that connected directly to the Melta's targeting systems. They wired my nervous system into the weapon's power cell, creating a feedback loop that allowed me to sense its energy levels, its thermal output, its readiness to fire. They replaced my eyes with optical sensors that could track targets through smoke and darkness and the chaos of battle. They did all of this with careful precision and detailed documentation, recording every step for the archives of the Mechanicus. When I woke, I could feel the weapon, not in the way I had felt it before, as an external object held in my hands, but as part of myself, an extension of my modified body as natural as a limb. The boundary between me and the Melta had dissolved, and in its place was something new, something that had no name in any language I knew. I was the weapon and the weapon was me, and together we were a system designed for a single purpose, the destruction of armored targets. I returned to the field. I killed tanks. I saved infantry. I gathered data and transmitted it to the Medicae, and felt the last traces of the phantom warmth fade into something cold and crystalline and absolute. I no longer sought combat for the sake of feeling. I sought it because it was my function, my purpose, the reason I had been made. I was not a soldier anymore. I was a weapons platform that happened to retain certain human characteristics, a biological chassis for technological destruction. Sailor still fought beside me. She still called me Caro, still treated me as if I were the person she had known, even though that person was gone and we both knew it. I appreciated her consistency. In whatever limited way, I was still capable of appreciation. She was a good soldier, a good crew member, and I would protect her as long as my systems remained functional. This was not love, not loyalty, not any human emotion I could name. It was simply efficiency. She was a valuable component of my operational capacity, and preserving that component served my purpose. I am aware that this makes me sound like a monster. Perhaps I am a monster now. Perhaps the modifications have done what the radiation could not, have finally consumed the humanity that I once possessed, and left only the machine behind. I do not know anymore. I do not have the capacity for self-assessment that would allow me to make such judgments. I have data, and I have function, and I have the cold satisfaction of purpose fulfilled, and I have learned to accept that this is enough. The war continues. It will continue long after I have fallen, long after Sela has fallen, long after everyone who remembers us has fallen. This is the nature of the Imperium, the endless grinding engine of conflict that consumes generations without pause or mercy. I understand this now in a way I could not before my modifications. I see the patterns, the systems, the vast mechanical logic that governs the death of millions. It is beautiful, in its way. It is terrible, in its way. It is simply what is, and I am part of it, and I will be part of it until there is nothing left of me to be part of anything at all. They told me I was lucky. They were wrong. Luck implies chance, implies randomness, implies a universe where different outcomes were possible. There was never any luck for me, only purpose, only function, only the slow, inevitable transformation from person to tool. I was always going to become what I am now. The only question was how long it would take, and how much data could be extracted from the process. I fire the Melta, and I feel nothing. I kill tanks, and I feel nothing. I serve the Emperor, and I feel nothing. But in the moment of firing, in the instant when the beam connects and the target dissolves, and the energy flows through my modified nervous system like a ghost of the warmth I once knew, I remember that I used to feel something. I remember that I used to be something. And that memory, fragmented and fading and increasingly abstract, is the last human thing about me. When it is gone, I will be complete. When it is gone, I will be perfect. When it is gone, I will be exactly what they always wanted me to be. From the moment the recruiting sergeant looked at my scores and smiled and told me I had been selected for something special, a weapon, a tool, a system for the destruction of armored targets, nothing more, nothing less, nothing else. The Melta sings when it fires. I no longer hear beauty in the song. I hear only data, only frequency, only information to be processed and filed and forgotten. This is what they made me. This is what I am. And in the spaces between firing, in the silence where humanity used to live, there is only the machine, waiting patiently for the next target, the next engagement, the next opportunity to fulfill its purpose. I was Caro once. I do not know what I am now, but I still pull the trigger. I still kill the tanks. I still serve, because serving is all I have left, all I am, all I will ever be again. The Emperor protects. The machine provides. And the rest is simply function, cold and eternal, doing its slow and holy work.